as Ari Shavit talked about in a podcast episode I did late last week. I try to remember, this was the last episode we had before last interview I had before. I'm dropping another one tonight, which is an interview, but it's the last interview episode I had. And he's a centrist, center left guy, former columnist for Haaretz, and he says, but balanced. And he says, look, so everything I just said, he would probably agree with, but he also says that many Israelis, including many critics of this government, have come to recognize that what Israel accomplished against Iran was extraordinary. It was the culmination of a multi-decade struggle, and there's a grudging acknowledgement or respect for the fact that it probably wouldn't have happened without Netanyahu the way it happened.
I actually quoted that same thing as a question for you, and to be specific, it was, if we acknowledge that Netanyahu was responsible for October 7th, then we have to acknowledge he was also responsible for June 13th. Right. At this point, and I don't think you agreed or disagreed really with the comment, because obviously it's a pretty bold statement. I mean, is it fair to say that, we need to acknowledge Netanyahu was responsible for October 7th?
I don't look. My general view in any democracy, when there's a massive setback, a massive catastrophe on the elected leaders' watch, they own a big part of it. So that's. I could give you any number of examples throughout modern history where I would say that's true in Israel or anywhere else. I do think as it relates to October 7th specifically, though, there was a consensus. This is not letting Netanyahu off the hook. It's just there's a structural problem in Israel, and the structural problem is that there was a consensus in Israel going back basically soon after 2005, that while there would be these skirmishes between Israel and Hamas would, there'd be these volleys back and forth, some military action, Hamas would fire rockets, Israel would, bomb parts of Gaza, or Hamas would, take a couple people hostage, or Hezbollah would take people hostage. There was a sense that, obviously not on the scale of October 7th, there was a sense that there was these military volleys, but Hamas ultimately wanted some kind of normalcy. They were not looking to upend their situation vis-a-vis Israel, and therefore, and this sounds so crazy to say now, but I'm just going to say it, that Hamas was basically a manageable problem. This was what they call the concepcia, the term they use, the concepcia, the concept inside the Israeli security system. Now, it is true that there were some in the more junior and mid-tier levels of Israeli intelligence, particularly within the 8200, which is the signal intelligence unit in the IDF, that were flagging concerns about activity that was happening vis-a-vis Hamas, and the consensus that maybe Hamas is up to something in Gaza, and they were observing some training that was going on, and they at one point had got a hold of some plans that looked eerily similar to what we now know as October 7th, and that it was never acted upon. But, in the world of intelligence, you get information, and you have to balance the information, because there's information flows coming into intelligence agencies all the time, like all the time. They're getting all these inputs, and often they contradict one another. So on the one hand, Israel, I mean, just again, oversimplistic here, but Israel was getting intelligence like what I just described, which is something's cooking with Hamas. They seem to be gearing up with something at the same time that Hamas was working quite intensively to get more work permits for Gazans working in southern Israel, and we're trying to, send signals that they were looking for, economic support and some kind of economic normalcy. And so you get all these inputs that seem to contradict each other, and so ultimately you need the security system, the political leadership needs, okay, what's our point of view? Like, what's our thesis? What do we think Hamas is actually up to? And then we can balance all the info we're getting against our thesis. And their thesis was that Hamas was looking for calm, not for war. And if they were looking for war, it was going to be more like the war we saw in May of 2021, which lasted 11 days. It was, again, these short skirmishes that certainly don't amount into any kind of existential threat to Israel. So again, manageable. That was the consensus in the Israeli security system. Now, the problem is, if you look at all the political actors on the Israeli scene these days, they were all in some way part of that consensus. Like, I mean, really, and I say this, these are people I have great respect for. Some of these people are friends of mine. There are many people I've had on my podcast, but, you know, every single one of them. I mean, really, I can get very specific, but every single one of them was either in a position of authority in the case of the government in 2022, the Bennett-Lapid government, or they were senior officers in the IDF, like Yoav Gallant or Golan, who's the head of the Democrats Party. You know, I mean, I can go through every one of these people. They were all in positions of authority in the years leading up to October 7th, and none of them were screaming that the consensus, the concepcia, was wrong. They were all part of it. Again, this is not, I'm not criticizing them. I just want to, there was a systemic problem in terms of how Israel viewed the threat from the south, from Gaza. And so, yes, Netanyahu was absolutely in charge. And yes, the person who's in charge deserves, you know, should take responsibility. But as we think about who governs Israel going forward, if we're headed to a post-Netanyahu era, I think there's a serious question for anyone who may replace him. Like, what did you get wrong? And, you know, what is your lesson from this period? Or do we need a total, like, kind of wholesale change? And I do think you're going to see some political actors enter the Israeli political scene who have not been on the scene at all. These are new players, many of whom are the miluimniks, what they call the reservists, who have fought 100, 200, 300 days in Gaza during this last, 20 months, who I think you're going to see some new, like a new political party, potentially some new actors who are completely, have no track record with these last obviously failed decade and a half as it relates to security on the southern border. But absent that, I think almost everyone else on the scene right now, sadly, is tainted.
It makes total sense. Obviously, I am someone who supported that Israel needs to do everything it could after October 7th to go after Hamas and get rid of Hamas once and for all. Obviously, this conversation has been one of the most hot button topics in the U.S. and across the world.